Ambassador Silvara spread her silver wings across the observation window of Station Harmony, watching three suns paint the void in shades of amber and violet. Her scales caught the light, throwing rainbow patterns across the diplomatic chamber walls. Today would change everything for the Draconii sovereignty. Today, she would secure the future of her entire species. Ambassador, the Collective Alliance delegation has arrived. Her protocol officer announced through the doorcom. Silvara turned from the window, her massive form moving with practiced grace through the space designed for beings much smaller than dragons. She had dismissed her entire advisory staff 2 weeks ago. Fools, all of them. They questioned her judgment, suggested caution, asked for review periods. The dragons had survived 10,000 years through strength and honor, not by cowering behind committees. The conference hall stretched before her like an arena. Chancellor Vimric stood at the far end, his crystalline body refracting light into geometric patterns. Beside him, the three hive queens hummed in perfect harmony, their insectoid forms draped in diplomatic silks. Ambassador Silvara, Vimric's voice chimed like struck glass. "We are honored by your presence." "The honor is mine, Chancellor." Silvara settled onto the raised platform designed for dragon dignitaries. "Shall we discuss the terms?" A human servant appeared beside her, so quietly she barely noticed. He placed a crystal tablet on her consultation stand and filled her water basin. Silvara glanced at him briefly. Average height for a human, brown hair, unremarkable face. Another station worker assigned to fetch and carry. What was his designation again? Daniel something. "The treaty is quite straightforward," Vimric continued, projecting a hologram of the document between them. "The Collective Alliance offers full military protection to the Draconii sovereignty. In exchange, we request standard cooperation protocols and resource sharing agreements." Silvara scrolled through the document on her tablet. 300 pages of legal language, but the core terms were clear. The Collective would defend dragon worlds against any aggressor. They would share advanced shield technology. They would grant the dragons permanent seats on 14 alliance committees. In return, the dragons would contribute ships to joint defense forces and allow alliance bases on 3 outer colony worlds. "These terms are more than fair," Silvara said. "I expected harder negotiations. Your reputation precedes you, Ambassador." One of the Hive Queens spoke, her voice layered with harmonics. "We have studied dragon history. Your people value strength and directness. We saw no reason for elaborate games. Flattery, but effective flattery." Silvara felt her chest swell with pride. Finally, species who understood the dragon way. Not like those tedious Confederation diplomats who spent months debating comma placement. The human servant moved around the table's edge, collecting empty data chips and replacing them with updated versions. Completely silent, completely invisible, like mobile furniture. "I will need 5 days to review the full document," Silvara announced. "Then we will proceed with signing." "Excellent." Vimric's crystalline face somehow conveyed satisfaction. "We have arranged a celebration dinner tonight. All the station's ambassadors will attend. They are most impressed with the terms you have secured." The dinner proved as tedious as Silvara expected. Ambassador after ambassador congratulated her on her diplomatic victory. The Trilith Consortium representative called it the most favorable treaty in recent memory. The Kelvin Union ambassador asked if the dragons would consider a similar arrangement with his people. Silvara accepted the praise with practiced humility, though internally she agreed with every word. She had accomplished in 2 weeks what others would have fumbled for years. The Draconii sovereignty would finally have the protection it needed to expand without fear of hostile neighbors. The human servant, Daniel, stood against the wall with the other service workers. They all wore the same gray uniforms. All maintained the same neutral expressions. Occasionally, one would step forward to refill drinks or clear plates, then fade back into the background. Useful, in their way, but beneath notice. Back in her private quarters, Silvara allowed herself to truly relax. She transformed to her smaller form, more comfortable for indoor spaces, and reviewed the treaty one more time. The language was dense, filled with cross-references and legal terminology, but nothing concerning. Section 7 outlined military cooperation. Section 12 covered technology sharing. Section 19 detailed dispute resolution. A soft chime at her door interrupted her reading. "Enter," she called, expecting her protocol officer. Daniel stepped inside, carrying a stack of physical documents. Silvara frowned. Why was the servant here? "Ambassador, I organized the treaty sections as you requested," he said, his voice quiet and professional. "Hard copies for your review." She didn't remember requesting physical copies, but perhaps she had mentioned it to someone. Daniel placed the documents on her desk with careful precision, each stack aligned perfectly with the others. "Is something wrong?" Silvara asked, noticing him pause. "No, ambassador. Just ensuring the pagination is correct." He hesitated, opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it. "Will that be all?" "Yes, dismissed." Daniel bowed slightly and left. Silvara returned to her reading, putting the servant out of her mind entirely. 5 days until signing. 5 days until the Draconii sovereignty entered a new era of security and prosperity. 5 days until Silvara's name would be carved into the Hall of Great Dragons alongside the legendary peacemakers and warriors of old. She looked at the physical documents Daniel had left. The treaty text in hard copy, every appendix and subsection printed and bound. Thorough work, she supposed, though unnecessary in an age of digital tablets. Humans seemed attached to their primitive paper technology. Outside her window, Station Harmony rotated slowly against the stars. Thousands of species lived here, worked here, traded and negotiated and built the future together. And tomorrow, the dragons would secure their place in that future forever. Silvara allowed herself a small smile. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Daniel Reed woke at 0500 station time, same as every day for the past 8 months. His quarters barely qualified as a room, more like a closet with a bed, but it was clean and the air recycling worked. Better than some places he had slept during the lean years back on Earth. He pulled on his gray service uniform and checked his tablet for the day's assignments. Ambassador Silvara, 0600 to 2200, full diplomatic support. That meant 16 hours of standing, fetching, organizing, and being invisible. His feet already hurt thinking about it. The human services cafeteria hummed with quiet conversation as Daniel grabbed breakfast. Synthetic eggs and protein bread, but the coffee was real. One of the few luxuries Station Harmony provided its service workers. "You look tired," Patricia said, sliding into the seat across from him. She worked for the Kelvin Union delegation, had been on the station 3 years longer than Daniel. Long week ahead. The Dragon Ambassador is signing that big treaty. Patricia stirred her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "I heard about that. My bosses are talking about it. They seem worried." "Why would they be worried?" "Everyone says it is a great deal for the dragons." "Maybe too great." Patricia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know how this works, Daniel. When something looks perfect, someone is probably hiding the price." Daniel thought about the treaty documents he had been organizing. 300 pages of legal language, dozens of appendices, hundreds of cross-references. He had spent his free time yesterday trying to understand the structure, and something kept nagging at him. The way sections referred to each other seemed off somehow. "I should get going," he said, finishing his coffee. "Silvara wants everything perfect. Just be careful." "And Daniel." Patricia caught his arm. "Even if you notice something wrong, think hard before you speak up. People like us, we are only valuable when we are invisible." The word stayed with him as he prepared Silvara's morning briefing materials. People like us. Service workers. Background elements in other people's important lives. Daniel had been something else once, someone else. That felt like a different lifetime. He had been a forensic accountant in Chicago. Good at his job, too. The kind of person who could look at a company's books and find the stories hidden in the numbers. He found fraud, traced money through shell companies, testified in court cases. Then the automation wave hit, and his firm decided algorithms could do his job for 70% less money. The job loss came the same month his sister Emma got her diagnosis. Rare genetic disorder, treatment available but expensive. Their parents were gone, and Emma's teacher's salary barely covered her apartment. Someone had to help. Station Harmony paid service workers well by Earth standards. Daniel could send money home every month, enough to cover Emma's treatments and medications. The work was simple, the hours long, but his sister was alive. That made everything worth it. Silvara arrived at her office promptly at 0700. Daniel had already prepared her schedule, organized her correspondence, and arranged the day's briefing materials. She barely glanced at him as she settled into her workspace. "Ambassador, you have 3 conference calls this morning," Daniel said. "Then lunch with the Trilith representative. The afternoon is blocked for treaty review." "Good." Silvara activated her communication console. "I will need the treaty documents in both digital and physical format by 1400. "Already prepared, Ambassador. They are on your desk." She looked at him then, really looked for perhaps the first time all week. "You are efficient." "Thank you, Ambassador." That was the end of their conversation. Silvara dove into her work, and Daniel faded back into the background where people like him belonged. During her lunch meeting, Daniel stood against the wall with the other service workers. The Trilith ambassador was discussing the treaty with obvious admiration. Silvara was explaining some of the finer points, her voice carrying across the private dining room. "Section 7 outlines our military cooperation," she said. "We contribute ships to joint defense forces, but command authority remains with Dragon officers." Daniel's mind caught on something. Command authority. He had seen that phrase in the treaty, but where? He pulled up his personal tablet, accessing the copy of the document he had saved for organization purposes. Section 7, paragraph 12. But there was a cross-reference there, pointing to Appendix C. He found Appendix C during a quiet moment while Silvara took a private call. The appendix discussed resource allocation and base rights. Nothing about command authority. But there was another cross-reference, this one pointing to Section 19. Section 19 was about dispute resolution. Another cross-reference, this time to Appendix F. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The cross-references were not just complicated. They were deliberately confusing. Each one pointed somewhere else, creating a maze of definitions and clauses that he tried to focus on his work, but the thought kept circling back. In his old job, this was exactly the kind of structure companies used to hide things. Create enough complexity, and most people would just trust the surface meaning without tracing every thread. Daniel. He jumped slightly. Silvara was looking at him with irritation. "Yes, Ambassador. I called your name twice. The water basin needs refilling." "Of course. My apologies." He refilled the basin, hating how his hands shook slightly. Was he seeing problems where none existed? 8 months of service work had not erased his training, but maybe it had made him paranoid. The Collective Alliance was respected across the galaxy. Chancellor Vimrick had a reputation for fair dealing, but that nagging feeling would not go away. That night, after Silvara dismissed him at 22:15, Daniel returned to his quarters and pulled up the treaty again. He started at Section 1 and began manually checking every cross-reference, following every thread to its actual destination, .by0300. He had checked 50 pages. By 0400, his eyes burned and his head ached. But the pattern was becoming clear. Something was very, very wrong with this treaty, and he had less than 4 days to figure out what to do about it. 3 days until signing. Daniel arrived at Silvara's office with dark circles under his eyes and a decision weighing on his mind. He had spent every free hour for the past 2 nights tracing the treaty's cross-references, and what he found made his blood run cold. The document was a trap. A brilliant, carefully constructed trap that relied on one simple assumption: that no one would actually follow every reference to its conclusion. Silvara was reviewing the treaty with 2 visiting Dragon officials, her voice confident as she walked them through the major points. Daniel set down her morning refreshments and tried to catch her attention. "Ambassador, if I might have a moment." "Not now, Daniel. As you can see, I am occupied. It is about the treaty. I found something." I said, "Not now." Her tone was sharp, dismissive. The visiting officials did not even glance at him. "Wait outside." Daniel stood in the corridor, his prepared notes clutched in his hand. He had written everything down, created a simple flowchart showing how the cross-references created a circular definition loop. If he could just explain it to her, show her the pattern, she would understand. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, the officials left, and Daniel tried again. Ambassador, please, this is important. Daniel, I appreciate your dedication, but I do not have time for minor administrative concerns. The treaty has been reviewed by experts across the galaxy. If there were problems, they would have found them. But I did find something. The cross-references in Section 7. Enough. Silvara's scales flickered with irritation. I have a lunch meeting. We will discuss whatever is troubling you later. Later never came. Silvara's schedule was packed with meetings, calls, and preparation sessions. Every time Daniel tried to approach, she waved him away, or someone else demanded her attention. In desperation, he tried writing a formal memo through the station's official channels. He spent an hour crafting it, explaining the problem as clearly as possible, attaching his documentation. He submitted it through the diplomatic communication system, sender not authorized for diplomatic correspondence. Message rejected. He tried sending it directly to Silvara's personal inbox. Filtered. Non-essential personnel communication. 2 days until signing. Daniel barely slept, trying to figure out another way to reach her. He considered going to other ambassadors, but who would listen to a human service worker? He had no credentials, no authority, no voice in these halls. Patricia found him in the cafeteria, staring at his untouched breakfast. You look terrible, she said bluntly. I found something in the treaty. Something bad, but I cannot get anyone to listen. Patricia sat down slowly. How bad? The dragons will lose their military sovereignty. The whole thing is designed to make them a client state of the collective alliance. It is hidden in the way the legal definitions work, but it is there. And you are sure? Absolutely certain? Daniel pulled out his tablet and showed her the flowcharts, the traced references, the circular logic that redefined key terms. Patricia was smart, picked up patterns quickly. He watched her expression change as she followed the thread. Oh no, she whispered. Daniel, this is huge. You have to tell someone. I tried. Silvara will not listen. The system blocks my messages. I am nobody here, Patricia. Just furniture that moves. Then you need to make noise. Make them listen. I will lose my job. Probably get banned from the station. Emma's treatments. Your sister would not want this. Millions of dragons could suffer because of this treaty. You know that. Daniel knew. He had known since the moment he found the trap. But knowing something was right and having the courage to do it were different things. That afternoon, he overheard Silvara talking with Chancellor Vimrick. They were finalizing arrangements for the signing ceremony, discussing which ambassadors would attend, what the ceremony would look like. There has been some suggestion we should allow more review time, Vimrick said, his crystalline voice carefully neutral. Unnecessary. Silvara's confidence radiated from every word. I have reviewed every section personally. The treaty is exactly what we need. Of course, Ambassador, your expertise is renowned. We are fortunate to work with someone so decisive. More flattery, more pride. Daniel watched Silvara practically glow with satisfaction. She trusted her own intelligence, her own judgment, so completely that she could not imagine she had missed something. That evening, Daniel made his decision. Tomorrow was the pre-signing reception, a formal event where Silvara would give a speech about the treaty. Every important ambassador on the station would attend. He would approach her there in front of everyone. She would be angry, probably humiliate him publicly, but at least she would have to acknowledge him, have to hear what he had to say. He could not live with himself if he stayed silent. He printed physical copies of his documentation, old-fashioned paper, the kind that could not be filtered or blocked by digital systems. He prepared a simple explanation, practiced saying it aloud in his quarters until his voice stopped shaking. Patricia helped him press his uniform, making sure he looked as professional as possible. You are doing the right thing, she said, even if it costs you everything. I know. For what it is worth, I am proud of you. Daniel tried to sleep, but spent most of the night staring at his ceiling, thinking about Emma, thinking about the dragons, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. Somewhere in the station, Silvara was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in her triumph. One day until signing. One day until Daniel Reed would step out of the background and risk everything on the chance that someone might actually listen to a human servant who had noticed what all the experts missed. He just had to find the courage to do it. The grand atrium glittered with the light of 1,000 bioluminescent panels. Ambassadors from 40 species mingled beneath a dome that showed real-time views of the three suns outside. Daniel stood against the far wall with the other service workers, his printed documents hidden inside his uniform jacket, his heart hammering so hard he thought everyone must hear it. Silvara stood at the center of attention, magnificent in her full dragon form. Her silver scales caught the light as she spoke with ambassadors who crowded around to offer congratulations. 6 hours until the official signing ceremony. 6 hours until she would seal her people's fate. Daniel watched the scene, trying to find his courage. Every instinct screamed at him to stay quiet, stay invisible, stay safe. But he thought about Emma back on Earth, about how she faced her treatments with courage every day. If his little sister could face down a genetic disorder, he could face down his fear. He started walking before he could talk himself out of it. The crowd parted slightly as he moved through. A few ambassadors glanced at him with mild surprise. Service workers did not typically walk through the center receptions. They stayed at the edges, appeared when needed, disappeared when not. Silvara was mid-sentence when Daniel reached her, explaining some detail of the treaty to the Trilith ambassador. She saw him, and her expression flickered with irritation. "Daniel, what are you, Ambassador Silvara? There's a critical error in the treaty." His voice came out louder than intended, carrying across the suddenly quiet atrium. "You cannot sign it." Complete silence fell. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze, felt his face burning, but forced himself to continue. "Please, Ambassador, I need to show you something." Silvara's scales flushed darker, a sign of dragon embarrassment and anger. "This is neither the time nor the place for whatever concern you have. Return to your duties. The treaty will destroy the Draconii sovereignty." Daniel pulled out his printed documents with shaking hands. "I have proof." Ambassador Kelvin from a Union delegation laughed, a harsh barking sound. "A human servant questions the greatest diplomatic minds in the galaxy? This is absurd." Others joined in the laughter. Daniel felt his courage faltering under the weight of their mockery. Then he saw Chancellor Vimrick watching him, and the crystalline being's expression was not amused. It was calculating. "Ambassador Silvara, perhaps we should move past this disruption," Vimrick said smoothly. "The poor human is clearly suffering from stress. Station work can be overwhelming for some species. I am not stressed." Daniel forced himself to meet Silvara's eyes. "I'm trying to save your people. Please just look at Section 7, Paragraph 12. "I have read Section 7 dozens of times," Silvara said coldly. "There is nothing wrong with it, not on its own. But follow the cross-reference to Appendix C. Then follow that reference to Section 19. Then to Appendix F. Then back to Section 7, but now the definition has changed. Circular references are standard in complex legal documents," Vimrick interjected. "They ensure consistency across sections. These references do not ensure consistency. They create a loop that changes the meaning of sovereign military authority." Daniel held out his papers. "I mapped the entire path. By the time you follow all the references, the dragons are not contributing ships to a joint force. They are transferring command of their entire military to the collective alliance." More laughter from the crowd, but some of it sounded uncertain now. The Trilith ambassador was frowning. A few others had pulled out tablets and were actually checking the sections Daniel mentioned. Silvara stared at him with an expression that mixed fury and something else. Doubt, maybe. Her pride warred with her intelligence, and Daniel could see the battle playing out across her features. "You're claiming that every expert who reviewed this treaty missed a fatal flaw, but you, a human service worker, found it?" Her voice dripped with skepticism. "Yes, Ambassador, because I used to find things like this for a living. I was a forensic accountant. This is exactly the kind of trap corporations on Earth use to hide the real terms of agreements. Forensic accountant. That was from the Trilith ambassador, her aged voice cutting through the murmurs. You were trained to find deception in documents. Yes, for 7 years, before the automation wave. Silvara took the papers from Daniel's hands. The entire atrium watched as she began reading. Her claws traced the references, following the path Daniel had mapped out. Minutes passed in tense silence. Her scales began to pale. In dragons, that meant shock or fear. This cannot be right, she muttered. Then louder, to her tablet. Display Treaty Section 7, Paragraph 12. The hologram appeared above them, visible to everyone. Silvara read it aloud, then followed the first cross-reference. Then the next. Then the next. With each step, her voice grew quieter. Other ambassadors were doing the same now, following the chain of logic. Daniel saw expressions changing, shock spreading through the crowd like ripples in water. By the ancient fires, Silvara whispered. She looked at Chancellor Vimrick with eyes that burned. He is right. The definitions change. By the end of the reference chain, sovereign military authority means something completely different than it does at the start. You are misinterpreting the legal language, Vimrick said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. The treaty simply requires coordination between our forces. No. The Trilith ambassador's voice rang out clear and sharp. I follow the same path. The human is correct. This treaty would make the dragons a client state. It is designed to hide that fact through complexity. The crowd erupted. Ambassadors shouted questions at Vimrick. Others were checking their own treaties with the Collective Alliance, looking for similar traps. Silvara stood frozen, her papers clutched in her claws, staring at Daniel as if seeing him for the first time. How did you see this? She asked quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. How did you see what I missed? Daniel met her gaze, no longer afraid. Because humans learned not to trust complicated documents. We learned the hard way. Silvara's private quarters felt smaller, with a dragon and a human sitting across from each other at the conference table. Outside, Station Harmony buzzed with emergency diplomatic sessions as ambassadors reviewed their own treaties. Inside, silence stretched between them until Silvara finally spoke. Tell me how you saw it. I need to understand. Daniel sipped the water she had offered him. An hour ago, he had been furniture. Now he sat as a guest in the Dragon Ambassador's personal space. The shift felt unreal. It started with the cross-references, he said. They seemed unnecessarily complicated. In my old job, that was always a warning sign. When contracts get complex, it is usually because someone wants to hide something. But complexity serves legitimate purposes in diplomatic agreements. Multiple species, different legal frameworks, various contingencies. I know. That is why I almost ignored it. Daniel pulled up his tablet. But then I noticed the pattern. Every definition of sovereign military authority pointed somewhere else. And each place it pointed to redefined it slightly. Small changes, nothing dramatic on its own. He showed her the map he had created, following the chain of references. By the time you follow all the links, the phrase means the opposite of what it seems to mean in Section 7. You think you are agreeing to contribute ships while keeping command. Actually, you are agreeing to place all Dragon military assets under Collective Alliance control. Silvara studied the map, her expression pained. I pride myself on my intelligence. I have negotiated treaties for 30 years. How did I miss this? Because you are honorable. Dragons value directness. You assumed complexity served legitimate purposes because deception on this scale would violate everything your culture stands for. And humans do not assume this. Daniel laughed without humor. Humans assume the opposite. We have thousands of years of history where people used complicated language to trick each other. We developed an entire legal specialty around finding hidden traps in documents. That seems like a sad way to live. Maybe, but it means we check everything. We trust, but we verify. Daniel met her eyes. My people learned to be paranoid because we could not afford not to be. A chime interrupted them. Silvara's protocol officer appeared on the screen. Ambassador, the Galactic Concord has called an emergency session. Multiple species have found similar clauses in their treaties with the Collective Alliance. They are requesting your presence, and specifically requesting that Daniel Reed attend as a witness. After the call ended, Silvara was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "And more than that, you saved my entire species from subjugation, and I treated you like you were invisible. I was invisible. People like me are supposed to be. That was my failure, not yours." Silvara's scales rippled with emotion. "I will correct it. I am offering you a position as treaty analyst for the Draconii sovereignty. Full diplomatic credentials, appropriate compensation, and a voice in all future negotiations." Daniel felt something catch in his throat. A real position, recognition. Then reality crashed back. "I cannot. My sister needs her treatments. If I lose my service job, I will arrange for her complete medical care. The finest specialists we have, and a diplomatic scholarship to any university she chooses once she recovers. I do not know what to say." "Say yes, please. We need your skills, Daniel Reed." "I need them." Before Daniel could answer, another chime. This time, Chancellor Vimrick's crystalline face filled the screen. "Ambassador Silvara, the Collective Alliance wishes to address the misunderstandings that have arisen." "There is no misunderstanding, Chancellor. There is deliberate deception. We disagree with that characterization. However, concerns have been raised by multiple parties. We believe the source of these concerns is problematic." Vimrick's gaze shifted to Daniel. "The human servant has fabricated evidence to create discord. We are calling for a vote tomorrow to expel all human workers from Station Harmony as security risks." Daniel felt ice in his stomach. Not just losing his job, but preventing any human from working here. Cutting off the income that kept Emma alive and helped thousands of other families back on Earth. "That is absurd," Silvara said sharply. "Daniel found what your complexity was designed to hide, where he created false patterns where none exist. Humans are known for paranoid thinking. We cannot allow such instability in our diplomatic corps." Vimrick's tone was reasonable, calm, deadly. "The vote will be held tomorrow at noon. We expect the Concord to make the right choice for galactic security." The screen went dark. Daniel sat numbly. He had known there would be consequences, but this was bigger than him losing his job. Every human on the station, all the workers who sent money home to struggling families, all of them would suffer. "I will fight this," Silvara said fiercely. "I will testify on your behalf. We will prove you were right." "Will it matter?" "The Collective Alliance has influence. They can make it sound like I am just a paranoid human causing problems. Then we make them prove you are wrong." "You said you found 17 other treaties with similar patterns?" "Yes, but I have not fully analyzed them all." "Do it now. Tonight. Document everything." Silvara stood, her full height imposing even in her smaller form. "Tomorrow, we show the Galactic Concord exactly what the Collective Alliance has been doing. And we show them why humans like you are not a threat to galactic security. You are essential to it." Patricia arrived an hour later with coffee and 6 other human workers who volunteered to help. They spread out across Silvara's office, each taking sections of different treaties, cross-checking references, building the case. Daniel worked through the night, his eyes burning, his hands cramping, but his mind clear. This was what he had trained for. This was what he was good at. Finding the truth hidden in complexity. By dawn, they had documented similar traps in 19 separate treaties. Different species, different terms, but the same basic structure. The Collective Alliance had been systematically building an empire through legal trickery. "Will it be enough?" Patricia asked as the suns rose outside. Daniel looked at the evidence they had compiled, then at Silvara, who had worked alongside them all night. "I do not know," he admitted, "but at least we gave them the truth. What they do with it is up to them." The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Concord was built to hold representatives from 500 species. Today, it felt completely full, even though less than half the seats were occupied. Every ambassador watched as Daniel Reed, wearing a borrowed formal uniform that fit poorly, walked to the central testimony platform. Chancellor Vimrick stood at the prosecution position, his crystalline form refracting the chamber lights into sharp geometric patterns. Behind him, The three hive queens hummed in perfect synchronization, a sound that usually calmed but today felt ominous. Members of the Concord, Vimrick began, his voice clear as struck glass. We face a threat to our diplomatic stability. A human service worker has made wild accusations against legitimate treaties, creating panic and discord. This behavior demonstrates why humans should not have access to sensitive diplomatic materials. The accusations are not wild, Silvara said from her position beside Daniel. They're documented and provable. So you claim, Ambassador. Yet you rely on the word of a single human with no diplomatic training, no legal education, and an admitted history of paranoid document analysis. That stung, but Daniel kept his expression neutral. Vimrick was good at this, twisting facts just enough to make truth sound like deception. I request permission to present evidence, Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. The Concord Arbiter, a being of pure energy contained in a sphere of force, pulsed with consideration. Permission granted. You may proceed. Daniel activated the holographic display and began walking through the Dragon Treaty, showing each cross-reference, each subtle redefinition, each step in the trap. The chamber was silent except for his voice. Section 7 appears straightforward. But follow this reference. And this one. And this one. The hologram traced the path in glowing lines. By the time you complete the chain, sovereign military authority no longer means what it meant at the start. Misinterpretation, Vimrick said smoothly. Legal language is complex. A trained diplomat would understand the context. Then explain these. Daniel brought up the next display. 19 treaties, all showing similar patterns. Different species, different terms, same structure. In every case, a key phrase is redefined through a chain of cross-references until it means the opposite of its surface reading. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several ambassadors were checking their tablets, following the paths Daniel had mapped. The Collective Alliance has been building an empire, Daniel continued. Not through military force, but through documents so complex that no one would trace every thread. They relied on trust, on pride, on the assumption that complexity serves legitimate purposes. And we are to believe you found what hundreds of trained diplomats missed. Vimrick's tone dripped with scorn. A human accountant turned servant, forensic accountant. There is a difference. Please enlighten us. Daniel felt every eye in the chamber on him. This was the moment that mattered. Not just for him, not just for the humans on the station, but for something bigger. On Earth, we have a long history of people using complex documents to deceive each other. Contracts that look fair but contain traps. Agreements that seem mutual but were actually theft. So we developed specialists whose job was to find those traps. He pulled up images of Earth history. Financial scandals, corporate fraud cases, political corruption exposed through document analysis. We learn not to trust complexity. We learn to verify every claim, check every reference, trace every definition to its conclusion. Not because we are paranoid, but because experience taught us that trust without verification leads to disaster. The Trilith ambassador rose, her ancient voice carrying across the chamber. The human speaks truth about his people's history, but he also speaks truth about these treaties. I followed every path he mapped. The Dragon Treaty alone would have resulted in the subjugation of their species. Other ambassadors began speaking, confirming Daniel's findings in their own treaties. The evidence piled up, undeniable despite Vimrick's attempts to deflect. Even if we accept your analysis, Vimrick said, his tone shifting to something more desperate, this proves humans are dangerous. They see conspiracy where none exists. They spread distrust and discord. The galaxy functions on good faith, and humans would destroy that. No, Silvara stood, her full dragon form unfolding. Humans provide balance. We trust because our cultures are honorable. That is good, but it makes us vulnerable to those who would exploit that trust. Humans check our blind spots. They verify what we assume. That is not paranoia. That is wisdom. The Trilith ambassador nodded slowly. Each species brings unique strengths to our community. Dragons bring honor and courage. My people bring long perspective. The Prism Lords bring logic. The Hive Queens bring cooperation. She looked directly at Daniel. Humans bring skepticism earned through hard experience. Not cynicism, but careful verification. The galaxy needs that. The debate continued for hours. Ambassadors argued about trust versus verification, about the role of different perspectives, about what the collective alliance's deception meant for future diplomacy. Finally, the arbiter pulsed with decision. The evidence is clear. The collective alliance engaged in systematic deception through document complexity. All treaties containing these structures are declared void. The alliance will face sanctions pending a full investigation. Vimric's crystalline form seemed to dim. The Hive Queen's harmonics shifted to a discordant tone. Furthermore, the arbiter continued, "We recognize the value of diverse perspectives in diplomatic review. The position of treaty verification specialist is hereby created. Species with relevant expertise, including humans, are invited to serve in these roles." The chamber erupted in discussion. Daniel felt Patricia grab his arm. Her face split in a huge smile. Other human workers who had been watching from the gallery were cheering. Silvara placed a claw gently on Daniel's shoulder. "You did it. We did it," he corrected. "I found the problem, but you believe me despite everything." 6 months later, Daniel sat in the same conference room where he had once stood invisible against the wall. Now he sat at the table as chief treaty analyst for the Draconii sovereignty, reviewing a new trade agreement. Silvara finished reading the final section and looked at him expectantly. "Well," Daniel scrolled through his analysis. Section 12 has a cross-reference issue. Not malicious, just sloppy drafting. But it creates an ambiguity in the dispute resolution clause. How would you fix it? They spent the next hour working through the language together, two perspectives combining to create something stronger than either could alone. Later, as they walked through Station Harmony, Daniel saw other humans working not as servants, but as specialists. Patricia had been promoted to treaty verification for the Kelvin Union. Others worked across dozens of delegations. The galaxy had learned something valuable, that every perspective mattered, that those who seemed powerless often saw what the powerful missed. That diversity was not just about different biology, but different experiences, different histories, different ways of understanding the universe. Daniel received a message on his tablet. Emma, fully recovered and starting her first semester at a prestigious university. Her message was brief but warm. "Proud of you, big brother. You proved that watching out for others is what matters most." He smiled, thinking about how far he had come from that small quarters where he woke at 0500 to start another invisible day. Now he was visible. Now his voice mattered. Now he could help protect species across the galaxy from the kind of traps his people had learned to recognize through painful experience. Silvara caught his expression. "Good news. The best. My sister is doing well. I am glad. We need you focused." But her tone was warm, almost teasing. "I found another treaty that needs review. Something about mineral rights and orbital station placement. Very complex." Daniel laughed. "Let me guess. Lots of cross-references. Naturally. Would not want to make it too easy for you." They walked together through the corridors of Station Harmony, not as ambassador and servant, but as partners. Two beings from different worlds, working together to make the galaxy a little bit safer, a little bit more honest, and a little bit better at seeing the value in every voice.